You think you know where your mind is. Right now you'd say it's in your head, behind your eyes, inside your skull, somewhere in there. That's where thoughts happen. That's where you live. Simple answer, obvious answer, wrong answer. Not slightly wrong, not close enough, fundamentally, structurally, categorically wrong. The question itself is broken. Asking where your mind is located assumes the mind is the kind of thing that can have a location, and that assumption, that seemingly innocent assumption, is where everything falls apart. Let me show you why. Point to your mind. Go ahead. Try it. You can't. You'll point to your head. Sure. But that's pointing to your brain, not your mind. Your brain is a physical object. 3 pounds of tissue. You can weigh it, photograph it, measure its electrical activity. But your mind? What are you actually pointing at when you claim to point at your mind? You're pointing at the place where you think consciousness happens. But consciousness isn't the place. It's not a thing sitting somewhere waiting to be found. This is the trap. We use spatial language for mental phenomena because that's the only language we have. We say thoughts are in our heads. We say memories are stored somewhere. All spatial metaphors, all borrowed from the physical world. But the mind doesn't occupy space the way a chair occupies space. You can't measure the volume of a thought. You can't weigh a memory. You can't assign coordinates to the feeling of happiness. These aren't properties that apply. It's not that we lack the instruments to measure them. It's that the question itself is confused, like asking what color Tuesday is, or how much justice weighs. The real question isn't where your mind is. The real question is what your mind is. And that question, once you really ask it, once you strip away all the comfortable assumptions, leads somewhere deeply uncomfortable. Let's start with what we can measure. Your brain, roughly 86 billion neurons, each connected to thousands of others through synapses. At any given moment, these neurons are firing, passing electrical signals, releasing neurotransmitters, triggering cascades of activity that spread through networks like waves through water. This activity is measurable. We can record it. We can watch it happen in real time using fMRI, EEG, direct electrode recordings. We can see which regions activate when you think about faces versus places, when you feel pain versus pleasure. The correlations are strong, consistent, reproducible. The brain is clearly involved in consciousness. No one disputes this. But here's what should bother you. These neurons are doing nothing mysterious. They're following the laws of physics. Charged ions flowing across membranes. Chemical molecules binding to receptors. Purely physical processes. The same physics that governs rocks and rivers and stars. So how does that become what you're experiencing right now? How does electrochemical signaling become the redness of red, the pain of a headache, the feeling of being you? This is called the hard problem of consciousness. And it's hard because there's a conceptual gap. On one side, objective physical processes. Neurons firing, chemicals diffusing, networks activating. On the other side, subjective first-person experience. What it feels like to see red, to hurt, to exist. No one knows how to cross that gap. Not yet. Maybe not ever. You can describe every neuron firing when someone sees red. You can map the entire causal chain from photons hitting the retina to signals reaching the visual cortex. But none of that description captures what red looks like. The subjective quality, the qualia, seems to be something extra, something not contained in the physical description. This bothers philosophers. It should bother you. Now let me make it worse. Your brain replaces itself constantly. Proteins are synthesized and degraded. Lipids are recycled. The atoms that make up your brain today are not the same atoms that made it up 7 years ago. The matter has been completely replaced. But you're still you. Your memories persist. Your personality remains stable. Your sense of being a continuous self doesn't flicker out when atoms get swapped. So if the physical substrate changes, but the mind persists, what exactly is persisting? Not the matter. The matter is temporary, replaceable. What persists is the pattern, the organization, the structure of connections, the arrangement of information. Your mind is not the stuff of your brain. Your mind is what the stuff is doing. It's the pattern, not the material. Destroy the brain. The mind goes with it. Damage specific regions, specific mental capacities, disappear. This gives us a clue. The mind is not independent of the brain. But it's also not identical to the brain in a simple material sense. It's what the brain is doing. The process, not the processor. The activity, not the anatomy. Think about fire. What is fire? You can't hold fire. Fire isn't a substance. Fire is a process. Rapid oxidation, releasing energy as heat and light. Fire requires fuel, oxygen, and heat. Remove any of those, the fire stops. Fire doesn't exist as a thing separate from burning. There is no fire stuff. There's only the process we call fire. Your mind is like that. It's not a thing inside your brain. It's what your brain is doing, a process, a dynamic pattern of activity. When the activity stops, the mind stops. There's no ghost lingering after the machine shuts down. There's just the absence of the process we call consciousness. This should disturb you because it means there's nothing permanent about you. No unchanging essence. No soul observing the world from some immaterial vantage point. You are the activity of your brain. And when that activity ceases, you cease completely, finally. But wait, you feel continuous. You wake up each morning feeling like the same person who went to sleep. You remember yesterday, last year, childhood. You have a persistent sense of being someone, an identity stretching back through time. That continuity feels real. So where does it come from if the physical matter keeps changing and the process is constantly fluctuating? Here's the uncomfortable truth. That sense of continuity is constructed. It's a story your brain tells itself. Each moment, your brain integrates information from memory, sensory input, bodily states into a coherent narrative. You, the protagonist of your own story. But the narrative isn't discovered. It's created. The brain actively generates the feeling of being a unified self, persisting through time. We know this because the feeling can break. Split brain patients, people who've had their corpus callosum severed, sometimes exhibit two independent streams of consciousness, one for each hemisphere. Ask the left hand what it wants, you get one answer. Ask the right hand, a different answer. Two selves in one skull. The unity of consciousness isn't a given. It's something the brain achieves through integration. And when integration fails, the unity fails. People with severe amnesia lose the ability to form new memories. Each moment exists in isolation. No narrative connects them. They lose the sense of a continuous self because the brain can no longer construct that continuity. The self is not a fixed entity. It's an ongoing process of self-modeling. And when the process breaks, the self fragments. Even in normal function, the self is more fluid than it appears. Your sense of identity changes depending on context. Who you are with family differs from who you are with colleagues. Your past self made decisions. Your current self regrets. The person you are at 50 is not the person you were at 15, not in any substantive way. The self is not a thing. It's a process, a pattern maintained over time through constant reconstruction. And that pattern doesn't exist in a single location. It's distributed across the entire brain. No neuron contains you. No region stores the self. It's a global property emerging from the interactions of billions of components, none of which individually possesses consciousness. This is emergence, simple components following simple rules, producing complex behavior that cannot be reduced to the components themselves. Neurons individually are not conscious. They're just cells responding to signals. But connect them in the right way, let them interact in the right patterns, and consciousness emerges, not as something added from outside, but as a property of the system as a whole. You can't point to a neuron and say this one is conscious. Consciousness isn't localized that way. It's distributed, systemic. The whole is not just more than the sum of parts. The whole is different in kind, a category shift. Matter becomes experience through organization. But how? How does organization produce experience? This is where we hit the wall. We can describe the correlations. We can map which neural patterns correspond to which experiences. We can manipulate those patterns and change experience accordingly. But we cannot explain how the physical process becomes the subjective feeling. The explanatory gap remains. What we do know is this: consciousness is not separate from the brain. It's not a substance inhabiting the body. It's not located in a specific spot you could point to. It's a process, a pattern, a dynamic organization of matter and energy following physical laws. Your mind is not in a place. It's happening. It's the activity of your brain unfolding moment by moment. It's the integration of sensory information, the retrieval of memories, the simulation of future scenarios, the regulation of emotion, the generation of language, all running simultaneously in parallel distributed networks. The totality of that activity, the pattern it creates, that's what we call mind. And here's what that means. Your thoughts don't have a location any more than a symphony has a location. The symphony isn't in the instruments. It's not in the sheet music. The symphony is the temporal pattern of sound produced by coordinated activity. Stop the performance. The symphony stops. It doesn't go anywhere. It simply ceases to exist. Your consciousness is the same. It's a performance, a pattern unfolding in time. And when the performance stops, when the brain stops functioning, consciousness doesn't go somewhere else. It stops. The pattern ceases. The process ends. This is not comfortable. We want there to be something more, some essence that survives, some core self that persists beyond the physical. But wanting something doesn't make it true. Reality is not obligated to align with our preferences. So where does this leave us? If the mind is a process, if consciousness is what the brain does rather than what the brain contains, then several things follow. First, consciousness is fundamentally temporal, not spatial. It's not in space, it's in time. It's a sequence, a flow, a stream. Consciousness is dynamic, constantly changing, never static. Each moment of experience arises from the preceding moment and gives way to the next. Second, consciousness requires a physical substrate. There's no disembodied consciousness floating free of matter. Mind supervenes on brain. Change the brain, you change the mind. Damage the brain, you damage the mind. Destroy the brain, you destroy the mind. Third, consciousness is produced by specific types of physical organization. Not just any matter can become conscious. A rock isn't conscious. Neither is a cloud or a river. Consciousness requires complexity, integration, information processing, feedback loops, self-modeling. Fourth, if consciousness is produced by organization, then in principle, different substrates could support consciousness. Silicon instead of carbon, synthetic neurons instead of biological ones. If you could recreate the relevant pattern, consciousness should emerge regardless of the material. The pattern, not the substrate, is what matters. This last point opens uncomfortable questions. Could we upload a mind to a computer if we mapped every neuron, every synapse, every connection, and simulated it accurately? Would that simulation be conscious? Would it be you? And here's where it gets truly disturbing. If consciousness is a pattern, and patterns can be copied, then identity becomes fragile. Copy the pattern. Do you copy the consciousness? Run two simulations of the same brain state. Are there now two of you? Which one is the real you? The intuition that you are a unique singular entity begins to break down. You're not a thing. You're a pattern. And patterns can be replicated, modified, distributed. The boundaries of self become unclear. If consciousness is a pattern, then asking where it is becomes like asking where a story is. The story isn't in the ink, on the page. The story is the meaning extracted by a mind capable of interpreting symbols. The story is abstract, relational, emergent. Similarly, consciousness doesn't exist at a location. It exists as a pattern of relationships, a structure of information, a process of integration. You can point to the brain and say, this is where the process happens. But the process itself doesn't have a location within the brain, any more than a calculation has a location within a computer. Now, let's push this further. If consciousness is produced by patterns of information processing, then consciousness isn't binary. It's not on or off, present or absent. It's a continuum. Different systems have different degrees of consciousness, depending on their complexity, integration, and self-modeling capabilities. A flatworm has some form of consciousness, minimal and primitive. A mouse has more, a dog more still, a human more yet. But there's no sharp line where consciousness suddenly appears. It's a gradient. This raises ethical questions. If consciousness is a matter of degree, then ethical consideration should also be a matter of degree. A chimpanzee or elephant or dolphin with complex social cognition and emotional lives deserves substantial moral weight. We can't dismiss their suffering just because it occurs in a non-human brain. And what about future artificial intelligences? If we create machines capable of complex information processing, self-modeling, and integration, do they deserve moral consideration? If consciousness is substrate independent, then yes, a conscious AI would be a moral patient regardless of being made of silicon rather than neurons. We don't have clear criteria for determining consciousness in others. We infer it from behavior, from similarity to ourselves, from reports of subjective experience, but these are indirect measures. We can't directly access another's consciousness. You can't feel what I feel. This is the problem of other minds. You know you're conscious through direct acquaintance, but everyone else, inference. And as we create more sophisticated machines, this problem becomes acute. How do we determine if an AI is conscious or just simulating consciousness convincingly? There may be no definitive test. Consciousness might be inherently private, accessible only from the first-person perspective. If that's true, then we'll never know for certain what it's like to be someone or something else. We can describe the neural correlates, map the functional architecture, predict behavior, but the subjective experience remains locked inside. This brings us back to the explanatory gap. Even if we fully understood the brain, even if we could simulate consciousness perfectly, we still might not understand why there's something it's like to be that system, why there's subjective experience at all. Some argue this is evidence that consciousness requires something beyond physics. Panpsychism, the view that consciousness is a fundamental feature of matter, attempts to solve this by claiming everything has some minimal form of consciousness. Consciousness doesn't emerge from complex organization. It's always present, just amplified in complex systems like brains. Others argue this just moves the mystery rather than solving it. The problem remains. Alternatively, maybe consciousness is purely physical, but requires a framework we haven't discovered. Perhaps a future theory will provide the missing link. Perhaps consciousness is a natural consequence of certain types of physical systems. And once we understand the relevant physics, the mystery dissolves. Or perhaps consciousness is indeed irreducible. Perhaps first-person experience is a fundamental aspect of reality that cannot be explained in purely third-person terms. We don't know, and that uncertainty is itself significant. Consciousness remains the most intimate and immediate aspect of our existence, yet also the most mysterious. We are consciousness trying to understand itself, a strange loop, a recursive process, attempting to grasp its own nature. So where is your mind? Nowhere. Everywhere. The question dissolves once you realize mind is not a thing to be located. It's a process unfolding in time, a pattern sustained by physical activity, an emergent property of organized matter. It's what your brain does, not where your brain is. And what are you? You are that process, that pattern, that emergent organization. You are the activity of your nervous system, integrating information, constructing models, generating predictions. You are not the observer watching this happen. You are the happening itself. This is uncomfortable because it removes the security of a fixed permanent self. It reveals identity as fluid, constructed, contingent. It shows consciousness as dependent on fragile biological machinery that will inevitably fail. But discomfort doesn't imply falsehood. Reality is what it is, regardless of whether we find it comforting. And there's a strange beauty in this view. You are not separate from the physical world. You are part of it, made of it, governed by the same laws that structure stars and atoms. Consciousness is not a ghost haunting matter. It's what matter does when organized in certain extraordinary ways. The universe, through you, becomes aware of itself. Matter looks at matter and recognizes itself. Atoms that were once scattered across space come together in configurations complex enough to ask what they are. That's what you are. The universe experiencing itself from a particular vantage point for a brief moment in cosmic time. Your mind is not in a place. Your mind is a place, a space of possibilities, a field of experience generated by physical processes following physical laws. And when those processes cease, the space collapses, the field vanishes, the pattern dissolves back into entropy. That's the truth. Not comforting, not simple, but true. And truth, regardless of its emotional valence, is what we're after. Not reassurance, not tradition, not intuition, truth. The question, where is your mind, was never really about location. It was about understanding what kind of thing consciousness is. And the answer is that it's not a thing at all. It's a process, an activity, a pattern in flux. And you are that pattern experiencing itself, aware of itself, questioning itself right now in this moment before the pattern shifts again and this moment becomes memory, before the process stops and the question ceases to be asked. Reality owes you nothing, not permanence, not comfort, not meaning, only existence. And existence, properly understood, is far stranger than any story we tell ourselves to avoid confronting its strangeness.